Joshua, and last week we kind of finished up all synopsis of all the conquests and the things that the battles that have been fought and all that up into this point. So we're going to kind of get started into a new phase of Joshua, and starting with chapter 13 here, and then going on in through to pretty much to the end of the chapter. We're going to talk about dividing up the land and the results of all these divisions that are going to take place. And there's a lot of information in there that we're going to that we're going to talk about in these next few chapters, and a lot of good information in there. Before we go any further, I'd like for Kevin, if you would, lead our minds in prayer. Okay, so we've got to keep in mind as we move into these next few chapters that even though all these military battles have been fought, the Israelites did not have control of all of the land, and they didn't have all the conquering done that needed to be done to possess the land. So what we're going to see in these next few chapters is kind of a record of the actual divisions, and then in chapter 22 and 24, we're going to kind of see the arrangement for the settlements and all this type of thing. So where we're at right now in the chronological order, we're kind of at the end of that 7 to 8 year period of conquest when the children of Israel, crossed over Jordan into the promised land. And like we talked about last week, we don't want to have the impression that all these battles were just, one day battles and this was cleaned up in a couple of months. This was a process, and it depending on who you read after, it was a 7 to 8 year period of time. But there was still a whole lot of things, and we'll see this in verse 1. There's still a whole lot of things that needed to be done for the children of Israel, and a lot of conquest was still going to have to be made before they completely occupied the promised land. So, consequently, dividing up the land among the tribes was still going to require faith and obedience to God's word, so that God would be on their side, and we saw in previous chapters when there was sin in the camp and God turned His face against the children of Israel, it wasn't a good situation. They were defeated, in that particular battle. So, Joshua in his conquests had removed the significant military threats that were going to affect the children of Israel. But like I say, there was still a lot to go. And each one of the tribes were going to be responsible to conquer and colonize their designated territories that God had provided for them. So, this study in chapters 13 through 21 is going to kind of result in an appreciation of the important features of God's covenant with Israel and how He applied this covenant, to those people. And beyond the details of the chapter, it gives us an insight into how God was dealing with these people, the importance of them remaining faithful to Him, and in this period of time, the children of Israel did a pretty good job of doing what they were told. Of course, we know in later times that wasn't necessarily the case. So let's start with verse 1 here. It says, "Now Joshua was old and going on in days, and Jehovah said to him, Ye are old, far along in days, and there remains yet much very much land to be possessed. So here we see God having a conversation with Joshua. Now, we don't know exactly how old he was at this time. He should be somewhere around the age of 100. Now we know that he lived to be 110. That's been revealed to us, but exactly how old he is here is not is not abundantly clear. But Joshua's had a pretty long and hard life. You take him all the way back to the bondage in Egypt. He went through all of that. He went through all the wandering in the wilderness. He's just went through a bunch of grueling wars, and time takes its toll on leaders. You think about pictures of the presidents that we have. Took a picture of them when they go into office, and after just 4 years, you take a picture of them, and you can tell that they've aged. And Joshua, I'm sure it was the same. The same situation with him, and he didn't do it for just 4 years. He did it for a lot of years. So he was pretty used up probably by this point, and God was kind of pointing that out to him. Now, if you've been involved in something, poured your heart and soul into something, as you get older, your mind thinks that you can still do it, but the body's saying, "Nah, can't do that anymore." And you think you're going to live forever, and you think all these things are going to happen. And I'm sure Joshua was this way. Joshua had to have been a very motivated type of person, and God's just kind of pointing out to him that the time is going short here, and there's a lot of things to do. So we've taken care of the military part of the deal. Now what we need to do is we need to take care of dividing up the land and finishing the other part of the work that the God had for him to do. It wasn't God's intent that Joshua himself lead the children of Israel in the conquest of every little part of the land. They were going to have to do some things for themselves, and God was just kind of pointing this out to him. Now, it's not really clear to us here exactly how Joshua was communicated with by God, whether he spoke to him in somewhere around the tabernacle, or if he appeared to him in some type of dream or vision. That's not been really revealed to us. So much of the land of Canaan, which God had promised to Abraham, remained yet unconquered by Joshua, and it was not possessed by the children of Israel. They were still kind of clustered together in the particular area where they had started, and that was kind of their base of operations for all these battles that were going to be fought. Now the old age of Joshua is observed, and he obviously was probably infirm, and he was not going to be able anymore to go out and to fight these battles. So we're going to have to change the power structure a little bit from being Joshua centered to being more centered on the elders of all these particular tribes, and they're going to have to step up and exercise a little bit of leadership to get the work done. But obviously he's still going to be the power behind the throne, as it were, and he was going to have to direct this, but not as much hands-on as he was before. Any comments about that verse? All right, let's look at verse 2. This is the land that still remains, all the borders of the Philistines and Geshurah. So what we're going to kind of go through in the next few verses is we're going to have a geography lesson. And probably you would do better looking at, if you've got a map in the back of your Bible, go onto that map. And we're going to talk about a lot of these places as I slay their names, and kind of give you some kind of idea of the areas and things that we're talking about. But we're talking about a pretty vast area that has not been conquered yet. And the children of Israel are not completely getting the reward of all their labors, and the promised land is still kind of yet undeveloped. And this account is given from Joshua's information, that they might know how to divide the land up in accordance with God's will. And God had a plan for the children of Israel, and it was important that they followed His plan to divide this land up so that there's not any problems. There's going to be some things that we're going to see that they were just going to have to live with. They weren't going to have complete a complete flushing out of all of the enemy and all the foreigners. They were still going to be there. So they were going to have to possess the land by themselves, and it was going to be very important, like I said before, for them to be obedient to the will of God. Now, one of the things that we see here that's mentioned is the Philistines. Now, we know from other parts of the Bible, the Philistines were a thorn in the side of the Israelites, pretty much all the way through those times. Now, the Philistines were not natives to the land of Canaan. They kind of migrated in from the northwest into the area, and they had by this time displaced a lot of the Canaanites in the southwest portion of the promised land. And because the land they occupied was part of what God had promised to the Israelites, they were going to be responsible for driving out the Philistines. So we see here that one of the areas was kind of the border there of the country that they talked about. And from the best I can understand, this is kind of along the Mediterranean Sea in the southwest part of the land of Canaan, where the Philistines had kind of settled in there.
Most of what they described here is coastal land.
Right.
They had not gone far to get to the coast.
Right. I mean, and you think about it, that was a lot of people to move, and this was a big logistical problem to get all of these people moved. And I mean, they didn't have the conveniences we have today. This was all pretty much done by hand and walking. So this was going to be a process and not a sprint. It's going to be more of a marathon. So the Israelites were not completely successful in driving the Philistines out of their area, and it was kind of a peaceful coexistence, as it were. But we know later on from the Bible that the Philistines, as time went on, their power and influence kind of grew, and eventually, they became the major enemy of the Israelites during the reign of Saul. So there was a small group of Philistines, but as time went on, they grew up and became a more powerful force. But at this time, it was a smaller, and they were kind of a secondary target of the Israelites at that particular time. Now, this Geshurah was the principal city that belonging to an area probably in Syria, and it's referenced quite a bit in 2 Samuel 15 and 8, and 2 Samuel 3 and 3, and that basically it had a king over this particular region in the time of David. And from the writings in 2 Samuel 3 and 3, it seems that the Israelites never completely came into the Philistines never really completely came into the hands of the Israelites. It was just basically a thorn in their side all the way through. Comments about that verse? All right, let's look then at verse 3. From Shahor, which is before Egypt, even to the borders of Ekron, northward, which is counted to the Canaanite, 5 lords of the Philistines, of Gaza, of Ashdod, of Akalon, of Goth, of Ekron, and of Avon. So basically, these were groups of Philistine, kind of like states in their nation, I guess would probably be a good way to describe it. Now, the area here that that's being discussed, there's a lot of discussion among the scholars about exactly, what rivers and all these things that were being talked about. Some of them seem to think that this was the Pelsonic branch of the Nile River near the Arabian Desert. And and it's also called the River of Egypt in Numbers 34 and 5 and Jeremiah 2 and 18. And then there's others that suppose that it means the Nile River. It's the Nile River itself. And when you start reading about all this, it gets kind of confusing. And most of the sources that they talk about were ancient sources that from commentaries, not as much from the Bible, but just general commentaries about geography and things along that line from the ancients who lived in that time. And it wasn't even really clear to them. It was their speculation based on history and rumors and legend and things along that line. So there's others that think that this river of Egypt is at the base of the mountain of Paran, and it ran westward, and it falls into a bay in the Mediterranean Sea, which lies south of the land of Philistines. So again, there's no real consensus to what the area that's being talked about here. And in this area, there's a desert of considerable distance, which is in this area. And if you look at it from a modern standpoint, we're kind of talking about the Isthmus of Suez is the area that's being discussed here. Now, Solomon reigned in the borders of Egypt, talking about this same area, but he was not in Egypt, and he also wasn't on the Nile also. So this is kind of that Isthmus of Suez that's being talked about here. Now, we see here that it talks about these lordships. Now, this Ekron on the northward side was one of the 5 lordships of the Philistines, and it was the northernmost of all the districts that the children of Israel were going to possess. Now, it's listed here the five lordships, and there's no proof in the Bible or historical proof that the Israelites actually possessed Ekron. But in Joshua 15 and 11, some think that originally it was given to Judah. The text doesn't say that. It's just kind of inferred. And it only states that this was the border of the tribe of Judah, and it went to the south side of Ekron. So whether they actually possessed this or not is really not clear. Now, from Joshua 19 and 43, we learned that it was part of the lot of Dan also, but it doesn't appear to have been possessed by those tribes either. So that was kind of a border in there. So if you look on your maps, you can kind of see the area that we're talking about. Now, what is without dispute is the things that were counted to the Canaanites were for sure the things that the children of Israel possessed. And it's generally allowed that the original possessors of the country were the descendants of Cain, Canaan, which was the youngest son of Ham. Now the Philistines, they sprang from Mizraim, the second son of Ham, and having disposed or dispossessed Avron from the plains, they had held this land and they dwelt there. And this is talked about in Genesis 10 and 13 and Genesis 10 and 14. So this is land that was familiar to all to the children of Israel from just reading it in the scriptures. Now these 5 lords were 5 dynasties that were famous in the scripture for their successful wars against the Israelites, and of whom they were almost a perpetual pain in the side, or kind of like a scourge to children of Israel. Now it mentions here the Avites, and they're not to be confused with the Havites. You got the Avites and the Havites. Now this seemed to have been a very inconsequential tribe that dwelt somewhere on the outskirts of Palestine, and they had been originally deprived of their country by the Capharims, and they lived kind of as a distinct people, and they were never really a power or have any type of authority. They're always almost kind of like nomads in this particular area. So there's like I say, there's a lot of geography here and a lot of different tribes and things that the children of Israel were going to have to deal with in their conquest of the land. Any comments about those verses? And years. Mm-hmm. Probably did. I mean, I'm sure that their dispositions was not a whole lot different from ours. Of course, they had a lot harder life than we had. And the other thing is, there was almost a perpetual war in that time. Somebody was always warring somebody. So, but yeah, of course, as they died off, you fired up the new bunch and you send them to basic training. They get all fired up and they're ready to go out and conquer the world type of deal. Mm-hmm. Same bunch. Same bunch. Yeah, they were all Philistines type. And those guys were warriors. Yeah, and we kind of, of course, obviously, warriors back then and warriors today are two different things. But I mean, you can't underestimate the power of some of these groups. I mean, they were very powerful, and they don't get as much history or credit in history as some of the more modern type, countries and stuff. But I mean, in their day, they were fierce warriors. All right, let's look at verse 4. From the south, all the land of the Canaanites and Mesra, which belongs to the Sidonians, to Apec, to the borders of the Amorites. So this lays in the south of the country of the Philistine toward the sea coast. Now this Marsa was supposed to be a city today of Martha, and it's on the Mediterranean Sea. And this goes back to some of the ancient writers. This particular one was a ancient writer named Calmet, and if you read through the commentaries and the work on this, his name pops up a lot. He was kind of a Josephus of his time, and studied this a lot. Or but the area that we're talking about here is the area which is around the Mediterranean Sea between Sidon and Berith. And there's another old scholar that they talked about a lot. We talked about this a little bit when we were talking about the Revelation was Pliny. He had some writings on this and gave some commentary on the areas that were being talked about here, because as time moved on, the names changed and things along that line. So some of the scholars actually think that the area that's being talked about is a group of caves that were cut out of the rocks in these parts. And they were called the caves of Sidon, and after that they were called the caves of Tyre. Now, if you'll remember, in a couple chapters back, the kings ran and hid in caves. So it wasn't an uncommon thing for people back then to live in caves. Now, the Targum, which we've talked about before, and in the Syriac and the Arabic versions of the ancient manuscripts, talk about this being along the river of Margaris. And Pliny also mentions this being on the border of Lebanon near Zidon and Bertrus. And mention is made of the waters of Murrah along the waters of the Tigris, and the Tigris is mentioned prominently in a lot of the Jewish writings, but it's rather something more important than the caves of the rivers meant here. It's likely talking about the tract of land near Sidon and who it belonged to. I mean, that's obviously, when this was written, these people knew the geography and they knew exactly what was being talked about, and that's kind of been lost over. That's also been lost over a little bit of time. Now, we talked about this epic back in Joshua 12 and 18. And we also see that this extends to the border of the Amorites, and the Amorite term is sometimes used to designate the inhabitants in the land of Canaan as a kind of an ethnic group, but really they need to be considered a little bit more in a restrictive sense, because they weren't they weren't really a major power. They were just more of an ethnic group. Now, there's no record of the Amorites having lived or dwelled in this particular part of the promised land there. And some of the ancient scholars seem to think that was a translation mistake, and they were actually meaning the Assyrians in that particular area. So they can play that all they want. I'm not going I'm not going to go there. Joshua, he said, he proceeds from Sidon to Apec, which is a city in Syria between Heliopolis and Babylon, where there was a temple to Venus there. And this is spoken of in 1 Kings 20 and 26 and 2 Kings 13 and 17. And it was the capital of the kings of Syria. So, we're talking about a pretty big, expansive area that the children of Israel are going to possess. Now, from this, Joshua passes on the frontiers of the Syrians toward Gelba and Gabala, and this is, again, according to some of the ancient writers, we're starting to move into the area of the Phoenicians in the grand scheme of things. So the conjecture of some of the ancient scholars and some of the authorities is, these lands were there, but it's not completely clear, even though it had been given to the children of Israel, that they actually physically possessed all of these particular areas. Because if you think about it, you take the number of people in the group of the children of Israel and you expand the land, there weren't enough people to expand all of the promised land. So there were some areas where even though it belonged to the children of Israel, they really didn't possess it. They just they basically just had control over it. Comments about that verse? All right, let's move on to verse 5. And the land of the Gibeonites and all of Lebanon toward the sunrise, from Begal under the Mount Hermon to the border of Hamath. So this is another country that remained unconquered. The Greeks called it Baalath, and Pliny talks about this particular area in his writings, and he actually talks about this town, this Galbal, which is now called Gabla, in the time of Pliny. And what this area was noted for, it was a kind of a pleasant seaside community. It wasn't a very big area. It wasn't a very big. It wasn't a consequential area, and it had a very small number of inhabitants. But it was apparently a very beautiful, splendid area for the inhabitants to be there, kind of like being on a maybe on a tropical island or something like this. Obviously, this wasn't a tropical island, but that kind of concept that gives you. Now, this was also mentioned in Ezekiel 29:7 of the splendor of this particular land. So God was giving the children of Israel some pretty choice property that a lot of other people would like to have.
That city was also given the Nimros, and Nimros, that area we're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
actually these days run a little north of modern day Beirut.
Okay. Yeah, because it's talking about here Lebanon toward the sun rising, so it's talking to the east. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that is kind of noted here by some of the scholars in some of this area in Lebanon, um, these mountain areas, they weren't conquered. The children of Israel didn't, they pretty much left those people alone, and basically it was a peaceful coexistence. Children of Israel didn't bother them; they didn't bother the children of Israel. And like we talked about before, when we were talking about the different conquests, it was a hard thing to go into a mountainous area in that day and time, and even in this day and time, and fight a battle. So if the battle doesn't need to be fought, then you just don't go in there looking for trouble. And I'm sure in God's wisdom, he was revealing to the children of Israel, which battles that they needed to take on. Any comments about that verse? All right, let's move on to verse 6. All the inhabitants of the hill country from Lebanon into, Lord, you guys can read that for yourself, okay? And all the Sidonians. Yep, there's two parts to that. There's that part on the Mesopotamia, yeah. Okay. All right, so then will I drive out from before the children of Israel, only divide thou it by lot unto the Israelites for an inheritance as I have commanded. Now, that's the King James version of that verse. If you've got a new King James version, you'll see that instead of putting in Mesopotamia, it says to the burning waters. Okay, that's what that name actually means. It means hot waters or boiling waters. And we name stuff today like boiling spring lakes. Things along hot springs. Things along that line. So this was what this particular area was known for, was these hot waters and hot springs. And I guess that's what the locals called it more than the word that's used in the original text was indicated that it talked here about the hot waters. And when they translated the New King James, or the New King James version, I guess they figured there was people like me who couldn't pronounce that word, so they just put in boiling waters because I can pronounce that word. That's right. Yeah, give people hot tubs. So this was not in Judea, but it was in and around Lebanon, as around the Sidonians who inhabited the ancient city of Sidon, and the villages and the lands that kind of the suburbs that belong to it. And these areas pretty much remained unconquered, and they weren't really possessed by the children of Israel, even though it was generally in the area that God had given them. But we see here that God was going to drive the appropriate people out so that the children of Israel could have the land. And we know from our prior studies that he was going to drive them out as long as the children of Israel remained faithful and did the things that God told them to do. So he had promised it, and all they had to do is basically follow directions, remain faithful to God, and they were going to possess this particular land. And we know that from our future study that they did do what they were told, even though they never fully possessed the land there, but God was good with that. He showed his wisdom in that. Now, these Sidonians were never really expelled by the Israelites, and they were only brought into a state of comparative subjection in the days of David and Solomon. So a lot of time had passed, and the children of Israel still did not have complete control. They just, I guess more of a peaceful coexistence between the two, because this was still a powerful force to be reckoned with. And as time went on, the cohesiveness of the children of Israel, kind of fell apart. So, we see here that God never unconditionally promised anything. Everything was relative to God's will and to the obedience that the children of Israel was going to have. So the promise of their possessing the whole area pretty much depended on their fidelity to the things that God would have them to do. Now, God never said that Joshua should conquer the whole land and give it to them. His promise was simply this: thou shalt bring them into the land, and thou shalt divide it among them, both which he did, and procured them a footing for the conquest that they were going to have to do themselves. Joshua laid the foundation, but the children of Israel were still going to have to do their part. They were going to have to establish each of these areas, pretty much on their own initiative. And Joshua's job was to divide the land up and give them the tools and the foundation that they needed to do this. So from that point on, each quota was allotted to a tribe, and they were obligated to drive these people out of there. Joshua was not going to be there to do the job for them.
Holding on to it.
Right. So this was, it was there for them to have, but they were going to have to take care of it. Any comments about those verses? Yes. 50 times. Right. Right. Very good. Any other comments? Well, Keith, I'm going to stop here, and we'll pick up. We'll start dividing the land next week, and you've had your geography lesson for today. So I appreciate everybody's attention and comments.